and welcome to this episode of People Matter. Today we're going to be talking about national minimum wage and our top tips for ensuring compliance. Why is it worth talking about national minimum wage? Well, beyond the obvious that it's a good idea to ensure that you're complying with these mandatory rules, there are two topical reasons why it's worth talking about now. The first being that from the 1st of April this year, the annual national minimum wage rate increase will go through, with approximately a 10% increase on the headline rate for national minimum wage and a 20% increase for young workers and apprentices. It's therefore a good opportunity to reflect on your systems and check you are complying. The second is that the Department for Business and Trade released its 20th round of naming and shaming in February of this year, where it named approximately 500 employers identified as failing to comply with national minimum wage, according to HMRC's audits over the last 8 or so years. It's not only a timely reminder of the consequences of non-compliance, but the report itself contains some useful data on the most common risk areas identified by HMRC, where employers are going wrong most frequently. It's these risk areas that we'll spend the rest of this session talking about. I'm going to go through these in order of likelihood from the least common area identified by HMRC to the most common area identified. The third most common area identified is employers failing to comply with national minimum wage simply because they are paying the wrong national minimum wage rate. This sounds obvious, but over 10% of employers identified in the naming and shaming report failed to pay national minimum wage for this reason. There were 4 different categories of failure to pay the correct rate. The first, and perhaps most obvious, is failing to uplift employee salary after the 1st of April annual rate increase. The second is failing to uplift wages to the correct national minimum wage after employee's birthday, meaning they are entitled to a higher rate of national minimum wage. There are different rates for those under the age of 18 and those between the ages of 18 and 21. After the age of 21, you become entitled to the full rate. The third area was failing to uplift the wages of apprentices after they become qualified and therefore entitled to national minimum wage. And the final area is failing to correctly categorise staff, so far as, for example, identifying someone as self-employed or as an unpaid intern, and therefore not paying them national minimum wage when in fact they are an employee or a worker entitled. These may seem obvious, but they can be surprisingly easy areas to trip up on, especially if you do not have robust payroll systems in place to update rates. The second most common area identified was employers failing to correctly identify working time for the purpose of national minimum wage and therefore not paying workers the national minimum wage for these periods of time. Around 30% of employers identified in the report were found to have not paid national minimum wage because they have not paid employees for all of their working time. The definition of working time under the national minimum wage is very complicated, but 4 non-exhaustive examples of the types of thing you might need to pay national minimum wage for include time for undertaking mandatory training, travel time beyond an ordinary commute, overtime or working in excess of formally recorded hours, or time recorded working whilst on an on-call or sleep-in shift. Like the first example, these may seem like easy mistakes to make and basic mistakes to make, and this is particularly so if you do not have robust and accurate time recording systems in place for casual or variable hours workers. The most common area of non-compliance identified, which aligns with our experience having reviewed and advised clients on HMRC audits, revolves around the idea of deductions or reductions to salary. 35% of employers failed to comply with national minimum wage because they made deductions to employee salary, which took them below the national minimum wage and resulted in non-compliance. What do I mean by deductions? Well, HMRC have identified the following as instances which can cause national minimum wage non-compliance. The first are standard salary sacrifice schemes such as cycle to work plans, enhanced pension contributions, Another employer benefit schemes requiring employees to give up their salary in order to get the benefit. The second are deductions from pay for things like food or meals at work, parking, PPE, or uniform required for the purposes of work. And the final one is childcare costs, some employers offering a day nursery style system in exchange for which employees give up salary. The important thing to note, and perhaps the main reason why employers so commonly trip up on this area, is that this can still cause national minimum wage non-compliance even where the deductions are at the employee's request or fundamentally are for their benefit. Again, having advised on a number of audits, this is the single most common area that we are seeing in practice. Given these risk areas, what should employers be doing to mitigate against national minimum wage non-compliance? Well, we've got 3 tips, and whilst not identified in the report, these reflect our experience having advised on audits and are on the more pragmatic side of the spectrum. The first being, and again quite obvious, make sure you understand your workers in light of these risk factors. It's therefore worth reflecting on what type of work they are doing, specifically what work they are paid for and what they are not, the periods in respect of which they are paid, so are they monthly, payrolled, or paid on a weekly basis, and are any deductions made, are they mandatory, are they voluntary, can you cumulatively stack them, and does all of that, when taken into account in the round, raise any national minimum wage non-compliance concerns? If you have any doubts, we strongly recommend speaking to a solicitor or reviewing HMRC's publicly available guidance on national minimum wage. And the second top tip is record keeping in systems. In other words, work smarter, not harder. Support your own compliance by ensuring you are keeping an accurate record of employees' working time and pay. HMRC expect employers to be keeping records for 6 years, and simultaneously set up your systems in a way that they support your ongoing reflection and compliance with national minimum wage. The final top tip is be proactive. HMRC expect employers to be complying with national minimum wage before they come knocking on your door and conducting an audit. If not, they can put you on their naming and shaming list. They can order the repayment of non-paid national minimum wage at today's national minimum wage rate, not the historic rate, and they can levy fines of up to 200% of the total arrears.